It's very much my honor to be able to moderate this session. As you can see, it's a very diverse group of speakers from academia with some lots of experience, lots of recognized research, recognized leadership in this field. From what might be called a conventional OEM perspective, we'll get some thoughts on that, but from smart mobility types, it'll be interesting to kind of compare those, the OEM perspective with smart mobility, since that kind of falls in the disrupted if some of the predictions come true. Also from purely shared mobility, one of the disruptors. You know, by the way, I forgot to say, for disruptors or disruptees, no fighting at the table this morning. From Tesla, which probably sits on both sides of the fence, although considering the CEO, probably the disruptor side, more so than not. And then finally, someone who's been involved with autonomous vehicle technology, policies, implications for literally decades, and he's going to tie it all together and make it as clear as can be for us when all's said and done. But before we get that, you're stuck with me for a couple minutes. And probably to start off with the question of, like, why does Florida DOT care? You know, when you've heard a few times so far, just yesterday and throughout this session, that, you know, when you're talking to a lot of the AV folks, it's just give us good pavement and good lane markings and then kind of get out of the way. We're not going to count on or depend on your connected vehicle or, you know, the infrastructure, the IVPs. It's just give us good roads. Florida happens to be sitting in a good place where we don't have freeze-thaw, we don't plow our roads every winter, we're very well funded, we've got good roads, good pavement markings, so it's kind of like, okay, why don't we just sit down and shut up and let them do what they want to do. But where this is very important to Florida DOT, and I can probably speak for every DOT in the country and probably every local municipality, you know, metropolitan planning, transportation planning, anybody who's got to deal with transportation infrastructure, mobility, managing traffic, all of us have likely some form of a vision zero goal, where it's ultimately we want to see zero fatalities, zero congestion, as sort of an overarching vision to what we would like to see in our transportation infrastructure. To put some of that in perspective, in Florida, just in Florida, last year, 2016, 3,157 vehicle crash fatalities. 3,157. People did not go home last year off a Florida roadway. 643 pedestrian fatalities in the state of Florida, just in Florida. So you know, approaching 4,000 people that were on some form of, might not have been the state network, but some form of a transportation infrastructure in the state of Florida last year did not go home. That's what makes this kind of stuff very, very important to Florida DOT, and why if even just a fraction of the promised safety and mobility gains can come to fruition from these emerging technologies, AV, CV, and all that stuff, from DOT's perspective, we are all in. And that's why if you've been to some of these in the past, you've heard DOT, Mike talked about it in the opening yesterday. What we're looking for, what we would love to get, is for industry, for you folks who are working all this magic, help us help you. That's what we want to do. We've got, I'll touch on them a bit, and it's been touched on, Joe talked about it, multiple test beds. We're making huge investments to try to facilitate what you guys are trying to do. So the plea is, help us help you. With general emerging technologies, AV, CV, just kind of the whole gamut, we most certainly have some challenges at DOT that we're trying to think about, trying to address, probably doing more head scratching than most, but maybe to put one in perspective is, if not daily, maybe weekly, in any newspaper you can find articles on something that's going on in this world, this emerging technology, transportation-related world, that will be a significant game changer to how mobility is done, how transportation is delivered, how mobility is delivered, basically how someone like a DOT does business. That happens daily, weekly, whatever. As we speak right now, we design and build bridges that are going to last for 100 years. We use conventional or current today's design standards, you know, 12-foot lanes, 10-foot shoulders, all that good stuff that you're very comfortable and hopefully having a smooth ride on Florida's bridges, but 100 years, it's what we're looking for. Our pavements, designed and built with a few maintenance resurfacings every 15 to 20 years, they'll last well in excess of 50 years. Our planning horizon, when we're looking at, say, we got to put a new interchange out on an interstate, or we have to do a significant capacity improvement, and on average, Florida DOT puts in about 400 new capacity lane miles a year, so it's not trivial. But all that's done in a 25-year planning horizon. So if we think, maybe we pretend, we think what we know is going to happen in 25 years in terms of traffic, congestion, safety implications, and we make some very significant decisions on that with money we're spending, with right-of-way we acquire. It is very disrupting to do that kind of stuff, and we're doing it on a 25-year plan, and yet the news will show something changing daily, weekly, whatever, and it's kind of like, what could possibly be wrong with that picture? So we struggle with that kind of stuff and are trying to figure that out now. From a funding perspective, as I mentioned, Florida DOT is very healthy. Our State Transportation Trust Fund, if you look how it's made up, roughly half of it comes from the state, which is, that's where we stand ahead of or in a much better position than most of our peer DOTs. We're way more heavily funded internally by the state than we are by the feds. The federal gas tax piece is about 25%. But the key piece of that is then, not all of the state piece is gas tax, but a sizable chunk of it is. So if you add all that up, if some of this electric shared mobility predictions come to life in a very short order, what is very much a healthy advantage for Florida obviously gets turned on its head. So there's certainly things to be thinking about there. That falls more into the political game, so that's all I'll say on that one. Another big one for DOT that's really a game changer is what's predicted to be, or maybe what already is, kind of the tsunami of data. Especially once we put out infrastructure, the IV piece, put out roadside units, DSRC, cell, sensors, all that stuff that we are actually putting out in droves, spending millions of dollars on that kind of stuff, and it's going to generate massive amounts of data. What the heck do we do with all that data? Do we save it? Do we collect it? Do we analyze it? How do we analyze it? You're not going to find a data scientist in any DOT job description, but the way we're looking is kind of like, well, maybe we're missing a boat on that one. So that's where we have kind of in anticipation or in preparation of that. Another thing that Florida DOT has done that I don't believe any of the other DOTs have done yet is we've just gone through really our most significant reorganization in our headquarters in the central office, where we stood up an office of transportation technology with the expectation, the mindset, the realization that kind of IT as we knew it before, like, keep my phone working, keep my computer working, make sure my Outlook email works. That's obviously all still needed, but really it's technology that's going to become, if it's not already, just as much of a core function of DOT and doing business, doing transportation infrastructure type business as asphalt and concrete kind of thing. So we're moving, we're making actions to move towards that. I would say still figuring it out, but we're trying to push that kind of stuff forward. It's another area where it's a challenge for an agency like Florida DOT is on our research. We've got a healthy research program. I would submit, and I don't think it'd be a surprise to anybody in here, that trying to research implications or how to facilitate, how to enable these kind of this emerging technology type stuff that's roaring down the line. That's not your standard materials or structures type research, and how to keep up with that. We're struggling with that. We're making partnerships with academia, even more so than we've had already in the past. That's been very healthy. Looking for partnerships with industry, again, how to facilitate, enable what you're doing. But it very much changes the research game for an agency like Florida DOT. Some of them have been
been talked about, but I do want to highlight what Florida Turnpike's doing with SunTrax. The groundbreaking, as Joe said, was Monday, building a 2.25 mile oval for starters. The primary purpose there is high-speed toll testing, but it fits immediately into some of the emerging technology testing that will be needed. Where it really will go crazy is with how they design and build the infield. Obviously, that's a massive infield inside a 2.25 mile oval. They'll be looking for input from industry, from academia. They'll be looking for help on how to design and build that. They'll be looking for partners on that. This afternoon session, you'll see Paul Satchfield in one of the session's test tracks or test beds, along with Dr. Lilly's the next one. It's a test bed similar to what Joe has done here. We're kind of following Joe's leadership with his THEA connected vehicle test bed in partnership with City of Gainesville, University of Florida, which is in Gainesville, and us. We're building we'll be building. It's in several projects comprise the whole thing, but are in various stages of design or procurement. We're getting the infrastructure, kind of ready at least for the CV piece, and as much as we can help the AV piece. Again, looking for input from not only UF, but partnering with academia, and especially so with industry. Again, what DOT can do to facilitate and enable your success, because that's going to bring us, again, to better safety, better mobility. That's what we're looking for. We are platooning, we'll be platooning trucks here shortly. One of the things, Senator Brandes has been called out a couple times about his forward thinking, his forward leading in terms of this stuff. And in last year's session, we were directed to do a study on platooning and pilot it. Hopefully we'll have some trucks out there platooning on the roadways, I hope in the next couple months maybe. We're doing some research on that, and that's rocked at least our structures guys' world. You'd think they would be kind of like maybe an emerging technologies Wizard of Oz, where you got the structurals engineers, hip-hopping down a complex shear critical bridge going harmonics, dynamics, fatigue, oh my, there's like, okay. You gotta love them though. Our bridges are in good condition because of them. But that's briefly some of the challenges that face something like a state transportation agency with this. But again, a state transportation agency that is reaching out and looking for ways where we can help you get where you want to go, because we very much see it as your success is going to clearly lead to our mission success, which is safety and mobility. With that, let's get into our speakers. And we didn't do the ground rules. I'll introduce, Katie, I'll introduce you. When you're done, I'll come back up and go right down the line. So we'll do it that way. Dr. Turnbull is Executive Associate Director at Texas A&M's Transportation Institute. If you've probably heard it called TTI. In other ways, she also currently serves as the Vice Chair at TRB, the Transportation Research Board, which is very influential, and will be the incoming chair. And also, while I'm up here talking about ways to help us help you, I want to put in a plug for RELLIS, R-E-L-L-I-S. It's a big test facility that Texas A&M and TTI are building near the Texas A&M campus. If you're not familiar with that, go take a look at their website. They're doing they have kind of the same attitude we've got, help us help you. So take a look at what Texas A&M's doing on that, and specifically RELLIS. Please help me welcome Dr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to speak with you today. I was asked to talk about actually another conference, which it might seem a little weird talking about another conference at a conference, but it's been mentioned by another number of speakers, including Senator Brandes, who participated in last year's conference. So I'm going to speak just briefly about the Automated Vehicle Symposium in 2017 that is sponsored by the Transportation Research Board. And expand on a couple, I think, of the topics and suggestions that have been made yesterday by the excellent speakers, maybe highlight a few different perspectives, and also, I think, set the stage for other members of the panel who will also be expanding on it. So the last AVS Summit was held in San Francisco on July 10th through 14th. Again, it was sponsored by the Transportation Research Board, TRB, of the National Academies of Sciences, which I think most of you know and probably participate in, and many of you participated in either this past symposium or one of the previous ones, but also the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, AUVIS, which again focuses on unmanned vehicles, does a lot of other things, but has partnered with TRB on this specific symposium. A variety of different formats used, similar to this conference, some general sessions, keynote speakers, presentations, panel discussions, but I think most importantly, with a lot of TRB committee activities, the 25 breakout sessions were probably one of the key focus areas, and they've always been of this symposium over the years. Really organized by TRB committees. The planning committee for this symposium is headed by, currently by Jane Lappin from Toyota Research Institute, that is also the chair of the TRB ITS committee, and then Steve Slatover from the Path Berkeley program, who's chair of the Automated Vehicle Highway Committee. Richard Bishop has been a key member of the Planning Committee for really probably since it started. So very active in the TRB committee structure, which again then can lead to developing research problem statements, as was mentioned, and identifying research needs and identifying follow-up activities. Similar to this conference, poster sessions, I believe they had 60 posters last July, again, especially focusing on some of the university research activities with the next generation of transportation professionals. An enterprise solutions series that highlights technologies and startups, and then a variety of other meetings that have been held over the years in conjunction with the symposium, including those by the US DOT, listening sessions or sessions on some of their new guidelines and activities. So like many things, and especially those developed by TRB or instituted by TRB, it really started as a volunteer activity among the different committees. In 2013, it started at the Beckman Center with about 250 participants, was successful. It built on that, and again, last year, in 2017, there were almost 1,500 in San Francisco. So I think similar to the activities here, we continue to see, obviously, the interest in the topic areas, but more importantly, the diversity of participants and the reaching out to different groups and different stakeholders to do that. About 46 states last year, 25 countries. Again, gives a little bit more of an international focus. A lot of activities going on throughout the world, really, and the global nature of all the different activities that we're talking about, whether it's autonomous vehicles or shared services or different kinds of things. And then again, bringing together what you can see from this conference, a diverse group of the public sector agencies, the private sector groups, the startups, and then the private or the public nonprofit that are also very critical to the success of these efforts and really are some of our key stakeholders, and making sure that we're including them in the discussions, I think, is one of the things that's critical. So the keynote speaker was Gil Pratt from Toyota Research Institute. One of the things he announced was Toyota's AI venture, which is really their internal venture capital, realizing, as some of the speakers mentioned yesterday in the little diagram with the circles, you know, the OEMs can't do it all themselves, and they're looking at sort of being the venture capitalist, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about that today from Jon and the approach Ford is taking, but, you know, looking to invest in startups, looking to reach out to, again, the diverse startup companies that they know they need to not only get the technology and the solutions, but also to reach out to that next generation of transportation professionals. So that sort of helped set the stage for innovation, partnership, outreach, and stakeholder. I think one of the interesting things was the 3 panels this year. One dealing with regulations, one dealing with truck automation that maybe Richard will talk a little bit more about, and then one on shared mobility that again had speakers from Lyft, Uber, and in that case, the city of San Francisco. So again, focusing on, in terms of the regulations, what are the states doing, what's going on at the national level, how can those be brought together? What do the global OEMs think about regulations and not wanting, obviously, 50 states having different regulations, but also a watchdog organization that helped remind us that if we're testing on public streets, there is a safety concern, and how do we match innovation and safety and making sure we're adequately addressing the safety aspects of it while obviously nurturing and fostering innovation and making sure that the U.S. continues to be the leader in this. Trucking automation was discussed yesterday. Again, a lot of good suggestions about how things might roll out. I think one of the things, and Richard may talk about this more, expanding a little bit on the comments yesterday, was the idea also of the port drayage automation or the distribution automation that is ripe for, and in fact is moving forward in truck automation, as well as obviously some mining activities and some of the things we think of as the more dangerous applications for trucking that are already underway in many parts of the world. And then the shared mobility, obviously a booming service in many areas of the country, including very small areas like College Station with Texas A&M University, especially on game day, which we are the 4th largest downtown in the state of Texas when Kyle Field, where Texas A&M Aggies play football, and everybody comes in not only for the football game, but for tailgating and all those other kinds of things. How do we get people in and out? Uber, Lyft are key, as well as the transit services and better organizing parking and traffic to get that group of people in and out. But good perspective, too, from, I think, the cities. How do we make sure that, as was mentioned yesterday, some of the unintended consequences, increasing congestion in some of our urban cores, increasing maybe vehicle miles of travel? Are we seeing decreases in transit ridership? So how do we balance those all off? How do we make sure there's transparency in what the different groups are doing? So again, I think some different perspectives on how we make sure we move forward with some of these activities, trying to address any potential unintended consequences in advance. As was mentioned, the anniversary of the Automated Technology Systems Consortium demonstration that Richard was key in, again, reminding us that it's not just right now that these things have been going on for a long time. I noticed you didn't wear your green shirt today, but everybody was, the 3 presenters on that all wore their green shirts from that event. Certainly some updates on activities that are going on not only around the U.S. At local state level, but also at an international level. Again, I think most of you know a lot of activity going on in Europe, Drive Sweden, the different UK projects. The European Commission, the European Union has really invested a lot of funding in this area over the last 4 to 5 to actually 10 years probably. And so again, a lot of things that we can learn from the things that they're doing there. We know the global market for automated vehicles and connected vehicles and different kinds of activities, as well as Korea, Japan, and that part of the world that's also doing a lot of things, and including some of the test tracks like the K-City in Korea. As I mentioned, I think one of the key things is always the case with TRB activities was the breakout sessions. And you can see here just a variety of the topics. There were 25. Some of those spanned 2 days, so they were 2 afternoons. So that's about really 6 hours of discussion. A variety of formats were used, but in almost all cases, the discussion was the key part of it. So they might have started with brief discussions, such as the one the senator was in that had different people talking about policies from the state and local government, but then just as importantly, okay, what do we still need to do in terms of research? What topics do we need to suggest and perhaps move into either the National Highway Cooperative Research Program, NCHRP, TCRP, state research programs, or passing on to the private sector. I think Ray Deere is here from the NCHRP TRB program and be talking a little bit about some of the recent policy studies. But again, obviously lots of opportunities, avenues to get things into that process, as well as talk about other follow-up activities, workshops at the annual meeting, outreach at conferences like this or other activities. So again, maybe just some common themes. As you all know, there's just continued high interest, a lot going on, interest in how regulations are there, but again, that don't prohibit innovation. I think the approaches that people have mentioned that have been taken here in Florida are key to that. Looking at some of the safety issues, cybersecurity issues, again, avoiding unintended consequences. How do we make sure we're reaching out to the broad partnerships and stakeholder groups involved? So just a little bit of information. Next year, again, we'll be back in San Francisco. There is a website for this year and next year. Be happy to answer any questions after the other speakers. The proceedings are being developed, and the PowerPoints from all the different presentations are also available on the website. And then again, I believe there's discussion that 2019 may come to Florida. So again, maybe a little bit of a preview of what you might expect 2 years from now. So again, thank you very much, and look forward to the other speakers and then any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Turnbull. You know, that thing makes a terrible noise when you move it. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Jon Kwant from Ford Motor Company. He's Vice President of City Solutions for Ford. He plays a key role in connecting Ford's internal capabilities and external partners to opportunities that will leverage enterprise resources in its interactions with cities. He's been with Ford since 1999 and held multiple director level and senior leadership positions. Help me welcome Jon.
Good morning. Sounds like my knee. Apologies if you were expecting someone younger this morning. The picture that is in the program is almost 20 years old, and that proves that everything lives forever on the internet. The bio is slightly off as well, but if you want to cross-check it, feel free to go to my LinkedIn profile. It was mentioned what I do. I like to also explain that the role that they've created for me at Ford is a unique one, and I think I have one of the best jobs there. We created an LLC a little over a year ago when Jim Hackett, who's now our CEO, came off our board. And yesterday we were talking about clock speed and how companies move at different clock speeds. And one of the reasons we wanted to put our mobility efforts in a different group is that, as many of you know, the things that have to be done in this space do move at a different clock speed. So I'm in that group, and my role specifically is to work with cities to understand their mobility needs, and then to help them or assist them to work with partners of ours or our own portfolio of solutions, which continues to grow. And that's my role. So I get to travel around a lot. I get to talk to mayors and Department of Transportation and transit officials, people I never thought I would meet in my career at Ford, so it's been great. Today, I only have 2 slides for you, and I'm going to attempt to keep my comments brief and well under my allotted time. I've done enough of these types of events now to know that you'd rather ask questions of me than to hear a canned speech. I've also actually taken the liberty of writing down what I'm going to say. I typically ad-lib it, but there's some simple messages I want to get across, and I thought it'd be better if I wrote some things down. Also, this is good practice if you're a first in the morning speaker, depending on how much fun you had the night before. It's always good to have a backup. Nothing I'm going to say today is also dramatically different than things that you've already heard here at this conference. This is not going to be a commercial for Ford. If you want to watch our commercials, you can do that this weekend with any football game you happen to turn on television. So this first slide is a picture of Bill Ford. He's our chairman and great-grandson of our founder. He was at a TED Talk in 2011, and that TED Talk is still on YouTube if you want to see it. I actually, some of you who've heard me speak before, I reference the fact that I go watch it once a quarter because it's kind of like my centering device. It reminds me of why I'm working on the things that I'm working on and why the company is engaging in these things that are working on. I believe that day he said things that were both prophetic, not pathetic, prophetic, and things that many would consider heretical for the scion of an automotive company that was well over 100 years old to say. And what he essentially pointed out that day was that cities were already facing, or they were about to face, what we call a mobility paradox. That paradox was that while cities were continuing to grow, they were actually reaching a breaking point in terms of being able to move about freely. Congestion was already chronic in many urban centers and would only get worse as more people continued to move to them. He stated that while many people still harbored the dream of owning and driving their own car, that dream would really be impossible in cities because you couldn't build enough infrastructure to handle the volume of cars that would be on the roads for every resident that would be in a city. And I think this problem, as we've all seen, is probably most acute in the emerging world. You just can't build another ring road around Beijing and expect it to solve the problem. He spoke these words before the advent of TNCs and car sharing became commonplace. And the thing that we can look back on now is basically say he was right. This is definitely what happened. So if we're going to believe the projections about increased urbanization, we have to change our existing transportation paradigm in cities in order to create what I like to call carrying capacity. That is what can be used to deal with not only the congestion that currently exists, but free up capacity to absorb the masses that are coming. If a city doesn't move, it doesn't grow. It won't. The great promise that cities represent will be unfulfilled. Chronic congestion is a barrier to growth, and it's not just about moving people. It's also about moving their stuff as well. Every person in a city casts what I like to call a mobility shadow. And that shadow is not only their personal movement, but all of the things that are required to sustain them, which include food, energy, clothing, and maybe a whole lot of discretionary Amazon deliveries that end up at your house as well, or office. So how do we go about changing the current transportation paradigm? Well, if all of us here believe in the inevitability of an autonomous future, and with this audience, I feel as though I'm preaching to the converted. There aren't going to be baptisms here this morning, I don't think. We believe the way there that creates the carrying capacity that I'm speaking of and provides the dividends of freedom of movement and freed up public space for other use really follows a simple path. The first one is to continue to encourage and provide for greater access to shared modes of transportation. Pretty simple formula. When people share rides, either via public transit, a TNC pooling service, or shuttles, we are largely utilizing the same space with much greater carrying efficiency than a single occupancy vehicle carries in that same space, and that's on average 1.2, 1.3 people. And notice that I said TNC pooling apps, because you can't count the driver in a TNC, because it's essentially a chauffeured single occupancy vehicle, a cab. By simply encouraging shared modes, we free up carrying capacity in a city to uncongest it, and dare I say, done in an ever-increasing way, free up streets for other public uses, like bike lanes and shared space. I was speaking to a mayor of a large Florida city yet this week, and he pointed out that when the schools are on vacation in his city, people comment on how much better the traffic moves within the region. They've done studies, and they've found that that traffic only represents about 5% of the single occupancy vehicles that are in motion in their city at that time. 5%. So solving urban mobility challenges and congestion doesn't seem that daunting when you think about that? How can you get 5% of the people into shared modes and allow for more freedom of movement within the system? The second step on this path to an autonomous future is increasing connectivity. We've heard a lot about this, of vehicles and their surroundings. When modes, roads, and loads, I had to find a rhyming word for the movement of goods, all become nodes on the Internet of Things, we will be able to take a systemic view of our transportation networks that will enable a level of orchestration that will allow people and goods to move more freely. We will be able to better match supply and demand and encourage greater use of shared modes. Until such time, it will be hard to envision CAVs at use in scale, because what I'm talking about is the actual C in the AV, in the CAV. They need a supportive infrastructure working in concert with all other actors in the system to be truly efficient. Today, an autonomous vehicle operating independently on the streets of a city like New York would essentially be paralyzed. The other actors in that system, cab drivers and commercial vehicle delivery vehicles, are very astute at fiercely defending every inch of conquered pavement that they consume. A journey in an AV that reverts to safety would essentially be paralyzed, as I said, and it would be a stuttered and arduous journey in that environment. People wouldn't use it. But in an orchestrated system, we can envision vehicles yielding to one another and traffic control mechanisms working to ensure optimal flow. And again, yielding increased carrying capacity that will help the increasing masses and their consumables move about more freely. At Ford, our vision is to liberate the human journey by making smarter vehicles for a smarter world. We are evolving our century-old business model from one that's centered on products and ownership to one that leverages those products with services in a growing array of them that allow them to connect to their environments. And at least in cities, those vehicles and those services will be used increasingly in a shared manner. In this way, the tragedy of the commons, that is our current mobility paradigm, represents the opportunity to turn that into the promise of the commons, as citizens move about more freely and the repurposed, liberated landscape and streetscape for more productive and enjoyable use. Thank you.
Very interesting message from Ford. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Jon Walker from Lyft. Another one of the disruptors. Sounds like Ford is going to be disrupting, not a disruptee. But Jon from Lyft works with their internal operations and product teams to help design and deploy new mobility services that meet the needs of cities and their residents. Please welcome Jon.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Jon Walker with Lyft, and you've probably heard of us. And that sounds like a trite introduction, but I couldn't have said that last year. If you've heard of rideshare, now 85% of Americans have heard of Lyft. So we are growing rapidly. We're starting to be top of mind for a lot of folks. So exciting times. So let's see if I can. So I want to talk today about how autonomous technology works with Lyft and works with rideshare, and why we're interested in it. It's not just a cool robot toy. I mean, it is, but it's not just a cool robot toy that we think is interesting. It's something that's really important to our business going forward, and something that's going to allow us to expand beyond our niche role right now and actually become a primary source of mobility in this country. And that solves a lot of problems that we've been grappling with as a society. So a lot of questions come up, right, about how will autonomous vehicles impact cities? Will they help or will they hurt? Will they cut miles in carbon? Dr. Turnbull talked about it. Will they add VMT? Will they be electric? Will they add greenhouse gases? And will they be shared or owned? Will we all buy an autonomous vehicle and ride around in a pod like Wall-E on a galactic cruise ship, or will they be shared and pooled? And will they have a different model than we've had for the last 100 years? So this has been talked about a lot, so I won't beat this to death, but our mobility system is broken. We go and we buy these vehicles. They're $30,000. They weigh 2 tons, and they're the second highest expense for most families. They're the highest expense for low-income families, and then we park them for 96% of the time. And then we pay for the parking that they sit in, and we add a whole nother room, probably one of the biggest rooms in our house, so they can sit in a garage at our house. And then when we do drive them, they're these wonderful vehicles like Fords and Teslas that have 5, 6, 7 seats, but we have one person in them most of the time, and you've got one person in a 2-ton vehicle. Less than 1% of all the energy that goes into these vehicles is actually gets used to move people, which is their supposed purpose. And we really don't have anything else that competes with them. There's public transit, of course, but you can see that's that small yellow sliver there. 86% of people drive a vehicle for commuting, and 76% of people drive in that vehicle alone. So Americans have spoken, the consumer has spoken. It's an inefficient system, it's expensive, and yet it's dominating. But we think that Lyft is providing a new opportunity to shift away from ownership into ridership. And I mentioned that we're now, people have heard of us now. We actually are in 300 plus cities and 95% of Americans. We have the largest coverage area of any TNC in the United States, and we do hundreds of millions of rides. So odds are, if you're anywhere, you can get a Lyft ride. We just expanded to Toronto, by the way. So if you're up in Toronto, you can try us out pretty soon. And so there are a lot of add-on effects to people that take Lyft. You're less likely to own a car, you drive less, you take transit more, and you use other mobility, shared mobility modes. I want to talk about VMT. There've been some, there's a lot of hand-wringing about this doomsday scenario where everybody all of a sudden doubles their mobility. I want to talk about the converse of that, where we actually think we can cut VMT with our service now and as we go automated. One of the reasons we think that is because our pooled service, Lyft Line, is so popular. We actually have some data that over 40% of rides requested in places that have Lyft Line are Lyft Line. So that means we're going from this single occupant vehicle model to strangers sharing with one another. And you might think it's just millennials. Well, it's not just millennials, it is millennials. But across the spectrum of our users, people are opting for Lyft Line, and that's growing very quickly. So shared. And then we have an interesting relationship with transit. In a lot of places, we're partnered with them to do services, and a lot of places we're being blamed for loss of ridership. One stat I do want to keep in your mind is in San Francisco, for instance, our #1 pickup drop-off spot by far is the major transit hub downtown. So we believe we are connecting people with transit, we are improving quality transit, and then the last piece is electrification, of course. Our vehicles drive a lot of miles, and so the more efficient the vehicle, the better. I already mentioned this one, over 40% of rides are Lyft Line. First last mile is one thing we connect with transit, so it's very hard to get to transit for some folks, and we've done some pilots where we've given free rides to transit, and that's been very successful. And then here's the Chevy Bolt, of course. So in California, we've done a program with Chevy and with Maven where they are leasing, flexibly renting Bolts to our drivers, and we have a waiting list. So there's also a lot of hand-wringing in the environmental community about how do we sell electric vehicles. Well, in our case, we have a line of people waiting to check them out to drive them on Lyft. So that's a very easy way to get them into the market, high mileage. And then it's not just about us. We foresee a future of different size vehicles, right size for right job. So you've got a sedan when you need it. There are all these really interesting shuttle companies like Local Motors, Easy Mile. I know a bunch of them are in Florida here. Very exciting for some niche applications. And then, of course, automated electric buses are coming. That will be very exciting as well. So where are we going? So I've talked a little bit about what we're doing now, and I want to get into the automation piece here. So why, we're growing like crazy. We're doing very well. But at the end of the day, we're about 0.1% of all VMT in this country. So we make a lot of headlines, and our competitor makes a lot of headlines, but we're a tiny fraction of revenue and mileage in this country. And why is that? It's because even though, as I mentioned, our personal vehicles are expensive and inefficient, they're cheap compared to us. We're between $2 and $3 a mile, and a personal car is about 70 cents a mile. So we just frankly can't compete for most Americans on a cost perspective. But when we can pull the driver out and add an automated system, and when we can make the powertrain electric and efficient, you've probably seen this before, right? We're talking about the Ford today. These are the three that we control: shared, electric, autonomous. We believe in connectivity. That's a great add-on to us to maximize the system. But this shared electric autonomous is the way that we undercut personal car cost, and we can really start to take chunks out of market share. I've often said that Uber is not our competitor. I mean, they are, but Uber is not our competitor. Your car is our competitor. We want to get you in our service, and we want your car to sit 99% of the time, or you to get rid of it and take Lyft everywhere. And when we do this, we can reduce the cost of our service by 80%, and we can reduce US transportation emissions by 90%. And you can imagine a future, this is what we're working toward, where you have a decision of, boy, do I go buy a $30,000 vehicle, I make the payment, the insurance, I maintain it, I park it, I fuel it, I register it, or do you subscribe to a Lyft application, a Lyft subscription service on our app that costs you, a fraction of that, and you have basically a brand new electric vehicle with a robo-chauffeur that takes you wherever you want to go for less cost. In my mind, that's a pretty easy decision. So what is our roadmap? Obviously, today we have human drivers. Actually, if you're in Boston in the next little bit here, you actually might be, this slide is probably a little too conservative. If you're in Boston, you may be picked up by an electric autonomous Lyft. So keep an eye out for that, and we're going to be expanding to other states and cities, and Florida is obviously very attractive because of the friendly regulatory environment. And we'll see how the vehicles handle snow. You guys don't have that problem. And of course, we're headed down the road toward fully autonomous. And there's also hand-wringing about jobs. We're going to need human rideshare drivers for about a decade, if not more. And we're going to need more of them. Our biggest challenge is onboarding drivers, and our drivers are doing this mostly part-time, and so they churn very, very quickly. And so really all we have to do is in the early 2020s, take our foot off the accelerator of recruiting drivers, and we continue to add autonomous vehicles, we're never going to have to fire a single person. So the natural attrition of our drivers will be fine. And actually, I honestly think we will have more drivers down the road when we're autonomous because we will need them for niche applications. Elderly, wheelchair, imagine a service where children go. So I think as we grow to 10, 20, 30, 40% of the market share of mobility, the niche applications that I just mentioned will still need human drivers and will be bigger than what we have today. So I'm not concerned about employment. I'm actually really excited about a new industry being created. Like imagine, when the word processor came out, typewriters went away. But imagine if all the jobs associated with computers and word processing were gone today, it would be a catastrophe. So I'm actually really excited that we're going to be creating a new industry that's going to employ millions of people in high-paying jobs. This is from a study I did in my previous life at Rocky Mountain Institute, and we projected that personal vehicle demand ownership was going to plummet in the 2020s, and automated mobility services were going to increase. I actually joined Lyft because of John Zimmer. John Zimmer was in line with this, our founder. He said, by 2025, if you're in a US city, car ownership will be done. And we're going to work to make that happen with autonomous. So what can we do today? That's our grand vision, but what can we do today? We can redesign cities for people. So imagine if we took the billion parking spots and repurposed them for people. If we could go to pickup drop-off more efficient. So this is in California where there used to be, I think it was I-80 dead-ended at the Pacific Ocean there, and they redid that to make it a park, and it's been much better for everybody. I want to talk about roadways too, because obviously that's a topic. So we worked with a consulting company in Los Angeles to look at one of their major thoroughfares, and this has come up too about urban mobility. We care about throughput of people. It's not about anything but efficient throughput of people. This is a typical city or major street in Los Angeles. We're getting about 29,000 people through it. It's mostly personal vehicles and bus lanes. We worked to redesign it with connected automated. We were able to triple the throughput in this particular intersection. So you can see with a dedicated transit lane, with dedicated lanes to automated connected vehicles, and then you still have room for better pedestrian access and better bike lanes, protected bike lanes. So triple the throughput, add bike lanes, add pedestrian walkways. This is the future that we foresee, a blend of new mobility services that are connected and smart. And then smart lanes. So Florida's a leader in this as well. We're really excited about this. We think that managed lanes and potentially congestion pricing are the way, it's the smart thing to do now for today's mobility ecosystem, and it makes this really nice transition into automated. When we have automated vehicles, you can imagine, okay, now this lane that's dedicated to buses, automated vehicles can flow in that as well. If we can get to a place where we have enough of them, we could platoon and you're talking about 5 times throughput of vehicle. So 1 lane on a highway is like a 5-lane superhighway. And that's all I've got. I do want to leave time for questions, so I'll wrap it up there. But I'm excited to be here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, John. Next, we get to hear from Al Prescott with Tesla. He's the Associate General Counsel for Tesla and directs regulatory affairs there. Also worked with Ford. And an interesting note, he is a Duke engineer and also a Georgetown law lawyer. Please help me welcome Al.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. I'm Al Prescott. We'll see if a presentation comes up, and if it doesn't, I'll keep talking. I'm a lawyer, and that's what I do. I'm sure you all expected to hear a lot of disagreement and fighting among the panelists here, but you're not going to hear that because I think we have a lot more commonality of our views than we have differences. Tesla absolutely supports that 100% of vehicles should be electric, that 100% of vehicles should have connectivity, and that 100% of vehicles should be automated. Today, we have 2 of 3 of those goals achieved. All of our vehicles are electric. All of our vehicles are connected. So Tesla's mission, for those of you, I don't want this to be an advertisement, but many people aren't as familiar with Tesla as with Ford. I didn't used to have this problem when I worked for the Blue Oval. Our mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy and sustainable transportation, and we feel it's important to do that not by punishing customers, but by giving them amazing vehicles that give them the performance they want. We started out in 2008 with a low-volume roadster vehicle, which, for those who are car buffs, was built on the Lotus Elise platform. That's how a car company starts. You make a niche product. Then you work into a smaller to mid-volume product that is more oriented towards a luxury market or high-end market, and we did that with our Model S and our Model X starting in 2012. And this year, we are beginning production on our Model 3, which is our high-volume, mid-size family car. And if we can overcome our production needs, we expect to sell quite a lot of these. And all of these are purely electric vehicles. All of these have an embedded modem and are connected. And all of our Model S's beginning in 2016 have the hardware that we believe is necessary to achieve full self-driving. There's a big asterisk on that, which is they have the hardware. We continue to work on the software, and when that is sufficiently validated and when we have a regulatory environment that we can start to sell those products to the customer and use them in our different states and countries, we will start to update cars with over-the-air updates. I'll talk more about that in a minute. You probably have seen this graph. I don't think anybody who is a transportation expert wouldn't be familiar with this. These are the motor vehicle fatalities since 1966, which is when NHTSA and the Department of Transportation really started. What you all know, and this is very familiar, is that this trend curve goes down every few years based on some terrific innovation, seatbelts, airbags, electronic stability control. But we have reached a plateau. It's very hard to make a vehicle more crash-worthy than it already is today. Tesla's Model S and X have achieved the highest rating that NHTSA has ever produced in the new car assessment program. But I think all cars across the industry are terrific in terms of crash worthiness. When I started my career, my first job was I was a crash test engineer. I used to crash cars for a living. And so I'm deeply impassioned at the idea of protecting people. And we just can't make the car itself any safer when it gets in a crash. We need to start reducing the number of fatalities by removing the human element, which is the cause of most crashes. In the US, again, no surprise to anybody who's participated in the panel yesterday or people familiar with this area, the leading causes of motor vehicle fatalities as causal factors are excessive speeding, drunk driving, not wearing your seatbelt, and overall driver distraction or human error in judgment. 3 or 4 of those, a self-driving car will be able to eventually stop. The seatbelt one, there's other cures, and hopefully that, because that's secondary, if we achieve the first 3, that 4th one will decrease. So I will posit it to you that self-driving cars throughout the industry are already achieving several of those goals. They don't drive drunk, they don't get distracted. If you're doing it right, you force people to wear their seatbelts, and they don't excessively speed. So the great apprehension of self-driving, I think, is misplaced, because we're already achieving what I think in the long term will provide a great deal of improved safety for people. So I want to talk to you, maybe have not seen this curve. This is what I call a technology availability curve. This sigmoid curve is loosely what IHS's data shows is the adoption rate in motor vehicles for airbags in the early 90s, and then ESC in the mid-2000s. No surprise. They start slow, they build up, and then they plateau when they start to achieve higher penetration into the fleet. This is what happens when you delay for 5 years. No surprise, we just shift the curve to the right. So some people say, shouldn't we wait and achieve perfect self-driving technology that works in every environment, all situations, all the time before we put it in market? And what you miss is this, which is that if the area between that curve in 15 years is about a 30% difference in the number of vehicles in our fleet. We have about 255 million vehicles in the US on the road and registered. That's about 30% difference in the number of vehicles that have any particular safety innovation. And so that's 30% of vehicles that can help reduce the number of 40,000 deaths per year that we're seeing right now in America. So Tesla's plan is to build from the ground up. I think there are other companies that are interested in coming from the top down, achieving a full self-driving vehicle at an SAE level 4 or level 5 level, and that's great. I think this is an area that has a great opportunity for many companies. Tesla's goal is to build from the ground up. So as I said, we give all the hardware necessary for full self-driving now. And as we continue to innovate our software, we'll continue to add features to the vehicle. All of our vehicles have connectivity, and so we send over-the-air updates to the vehicle. Our autopilot system, which is on all of our 2016 and after vehicles, all of them have received autopilot via over-the-air updates. They continue to receive periodic updates. Last week, we added 2 new features to our vehicles, which have nothing to do with autopilot, but were convenience additions. And we continue to periodically update, both for security as well as for safety, as well as for performance and an additional benefit. So in terms of where we are today, we offer level 2 self-driving, or on the SAE scale, if you're familiar with that, which is also known as an ADAS system or advanced driver assist system. The autopilot suite includes traffic adaptive cruise control, auto steer, and emergency braking. When we feel that we are able to add periodic limited level 3 operation for periodic self-driving without the driver in real time remaining engaged, we will do that. A big thing that I find that audiences don't appreciate well, and frankly, I didn't appreciate this well years ago. Everybody in the car industry knows this. As we advance, especially in the world of over-the-air updates, I don't have to have a fixed product that does everything all at once, because my product can adapt in the world. So I can continue to add capability as I go. I don't need my self-driving car to work on every road perfectly all the time. What I need is the road that you command the day you want to drive self-driving on that route. There are advantages for this in the ride-sharing space. There's also advantages for this in the personal ownership space, because it lets us slowly build up a marketplace where people can continue to experience this technology and continue to get more comfortable. instead of just going over the top and having the public's first experience to see a completely driverless vehicle with no one behind the wheel. We think there are great opportunities in both ways of doing this. We think that we contribute to the benefit of public acceptance and self-driving by slowly building up capability. And so in terms of vehicle technology, many of you know these won't seem foreign. All of our vehicles have 8 cameras. They have radar. We have ultrasonics surrounding the vehicle, and we supplement with high-precision maps and GPS. So that's what we have today. We'll continue to update the software as we go. As a lawyer, I have to sort of come to a couple points about policy and law. And when I do talk, I have all sorts of points I like to make to lawmakers around the country and around the world. It's hard to make those in Florida because the law is actually really good. Florida has been a clear leader in self-driving vehicle law. I remember working on the first self-driving laws in America around 2011 and 2012. There was Nevada and then California in rapid succession, Florida. When I look back on that, I'm both proud and slightly embarrassed. I'm proud because I contribute, I think, to something that is good. The problem is when you look back with the lens of 6 and 7 years to law in a space that is rapidly evolving. I think you've heard everybody say it's incredibly rapid. You realize that our definitions can get outdated. Our understanding of how these vehicles move will get outdated. Florida law has held up surprisingly well. And so my advice to Florida is stay the course. You are showing great leadership. Florida law is one of the few states in the country, I think there are 7 states in the country, that to one degree or another will allow an SAE level for self-driving. That's legal in Florida today. That will enable us to save lives faster because it encourages people to develop products that can enter market. In terms of goals for policy, I think Tom made a great point. What do we do with taxes and road taxes and smart lanes, as John mentioned? I can't emphasize enough that I think these new technologies should be encouraged, whether that comes in the form of favorable roads or that comes in the form of favorable incentives for riders, operators, or vehicle buyers. We can talk about how for every EV removed, we increase public health and wellness. We can talk about the same when it comes to autonomous vehicles. And so I think for lawmakers in Florida who have already achieved a good baseline in terms of good self-driving law, we want to see these incentives to bring these technologies to market faster. And finally, again, you are already here, so I'll just say this. So if there's anybody from any other state in the country here today, encourage, don't limit testing and deployment. Don't write a testing-only law for self-driving. 7 years ago, we started writing testing-only laws for self-driving. We put incredibly strict restrictions in place on that. The time has passed for those laws. We're already starting to achieve the goals those laid out. What we want around the country are more clear laws about full self-driving or levels specific to levels of self-driving that allow personal ownership of vehicles and purchase, operators, whether they be in a rideshare space or personal ownership, and the ability to operate, not just test. So with that, I'll conclude, and I'll save time for any questions at the end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Very, very interesting words. And finally, Richard Bishop. It's definitely my pleasure to introduce Richard. He's been dealing with, as you saw Dr. Turnbull's slide from the whatever it was, 1997 tests in San Diego. Richard's been involved with AV technologies and policies and all that good stuff for a long, long time, and he's given DOT some good help with our truck platooning as well. So please help me welcome Richard.
All right, good morning. Glad to be here. It's a pleasure for me to be supporting the state of Florida, as Tom mentioned, and the AV program as a subcontractor at HNDB and working with the Florida DOT guys. So that's been a great part of things lately. I'm active. I'm going to talk to you today about trucks. You just heard about the car side. I'm actually active in the passenger car world, the robo-taxi world, and the truck side. And we could spend a whole day and a whole 2 days on a truck AV conference. I mean, there's so much happening here, but I'm going to condense it immensely. But I need to ask, and thank you, Katie, for speaking about Demo 97 and Tom. And let me just get a show of hands. Who here was aware of the US DOT program in the 90s on automation? Okay, maybe 20%. I see that all the time. There's a huge gap of information. Maybe it doesn't matter now, but this was part of the legacy of making automation happen now. It stimulated the DARPA work, it stimulated Google's work, and I can tell you the stories about that and all from there. Okay, so with that, let me get into this. Connected automated driving, this is something I say in all my talks. You can't just talk about automation. You have to talk about which domain you're talking about. There's three. There's passenger cars, privately owned. We've already heard low utilization. There's the robotaxi idea. We've heard about that. And then there's the truck world. And both robotaxi and truck are fleet-oriented, and that completely changes the design paradigm. It changes insurance. It changes everything because well, the truck side at least is business to business. And we've seen all of this going on for the last several years. The car market is where things started with automation. It's a complex space, numerous players. If you're a startup, you're competing with established suppliers, and the end user purchases based on various practical factors, but mainly on emotion. So the venture capitalists have, in the last couple of years, discovered the truck market, and it's different, and it's a lot more appealing if you're going to invest your money because it's a business orientation. If you have to have a sensor that costs $1,000, $5,000, that's not the point. The point is return on investment on your overall system. That changes everything for the engineers. And obviously, these vehicles can be touched frequently by trained technicians. There's regular maintenance. That's a different world. Now, this chart is my sort of universe of the use cases for automated trucks. I'm going to talk about three of these, each very briefly. The first being on the upper right there, trailer switching, just to give you an idea of the low-hanging fruit that's out there. This is in Florida. Anybody know where this is? Probably not from the picture. This is the Anheuser-Busch Brewery just outside Jacksonville. And what you've got is a bunch of trailers. You see the loading dock there. There are guys whose total workday is about shuttling trailers between that loading dock and the trailer storage yard. An over-the-road driver will drop their trailer, grab another trailer, and be gone. So this is all private property. There is significant activity cranking up now to automate that operation completely. It's very attractive, right? It's low speed. You can even modify the infrastructure if you need to, and there's no regulatory issues. So keep an eye on these. It'll happen quietly, but it's for the trucking industry in particular. This is a way they get a taste of this technology in a more or less benign environment. But moving from there to the really hot topic in Florida and around the country is truck platooning. This is all about aerodynamics. A truck going down the road has to split through the air on the nose, and there's turbulence in the back, and both eat up fuel, eat up energy. I'm using a few slides from Peloton Technology. They are a startup that's been around since 2012 to commercialize truck platooning. As a startup, they're more public about what they're doing, so they've got lots of slides out there. They're not the only ones working on it, and no intention to offer a commercial here. But this is a nice way to display what's going on. It's all about V2V, DSRC V2V wireless linking between the two trucks. What you end up with is synchronized braking, connected braking and acceleration. So when that front truck is accelerating or braking, the rear truck is doing exactly the same thing, almost simultaneously. That's why you can move these trucks very close together. And when you do that, you're breaking up that aerodynamic drag and you get a fuel economy benefit. You see on the upper right, the Peloton has the idea of a network operations center to offer supervision of the vehicles, only platooning when it's safe, when the conditions are right, etc. And this makes the point a little more clearly about the value of the V2V. You have to understand this or truck platooning will make no sense. At the top, this is trucking today. The driver has to perceive what's happening, the driver has to react, and the brakes themselves have a lag in them because they're air brakes. If you add a radar to help the driver, that's great. You can get a little closer, but when you have this synchronized braking, those other two factors go away, and even the brake lag is minimal because the braking is simultaneous. So the benefits from doing this, there's a lot of data out there, independent reports, et cetera, that validate you get more or less 4.5% saving in the front truck, 10% in the back truck. Why does the front truck benefit? It's because there's less turbulence behind. And this is at a 40-foot gap. You know, it's better at smaller gaps. And there's obviously this reduces emissions. That's good for society. Inter-vehicle gap depends on who's going to put it on the road, but generally we're thinking 30 to 60 feet. If you're a technologist, you could go much, much, much closer, but there's no point in doing that when you're bringing something to market for the first time. There's a few studies out there looking at the regular driving gaps, typical driving gaps by truckers now. It's certainly well over 100 feet. Some say it's much, much greater. Peloton is saying the fuel savings will provide a one-year payback for this system, for the truck fleet's investment. And that's what truckers look for when they're adopting technology. There's the possibility for data generation for fleets and governments. Now, the interesting issue that comes up only for platooning and not for any of the other automation systems, and by the way, let me say that platooning is a low-level automation system, level 1. Drivers in both trucks are steering. Drivers in both trucks are monitoring the environment. What's automated is the foot pedals. So all of the complexity about regulations for highly automated vehicles, it does not apply to platooning. That's a good news thing. Platooning's legal in terms of the level of automation. Some of you have adaptive cruise control on your cars. It's the same thing with the connectivity. So, but what we do have is an interesting situation across the U.S. states about following too closely laws. Some states have a qualitative standard. You see that in the blue, reasonable and prudent following distance. And you can say, well, it is reasonable and prudent if I have this technology support. Or you've got some states with a quantitative numeric, quite a few, and Florida is one of them. Florida has a 300-foot minimum following distance, so you cannot platoon in Florida under the current law. How does Peloton approach this reasonable and prudent? Well, they lay out a set of conditions, basically promising, and of course the truck fleet would have to promise that we're only going to platoon on multi-lane divided highways, moderate or low traffic conditions, where the traction conditions are good, the topography makes sense, and that's the key role of this network operations center. So there's ways to do that, and there's lots more to that story, but that's sort of the high level. So where is platooning completely allowed now? Now, this is part of the result of some significant lobbying by the various tech providers. It's, in these green states, it is allowed in some form. Commercial operations ready to go. So we have a pretty good environment here. Certainly it's a minority of the states, but that's enough mileage to create a market that truck fleets are finding interesting, and they are lining up to get these systems. Doesn't make sense for every truck fleet, but it makes sense when you have a hub and spoke operation and the UPSs of the world and FedEx have those kinds of operations. There's a lot going on out there. A huge amount is private. You don't hear about that. The things that have some public involvement. Federal Highways in 2013 actually funded 2 projects to take platooning technology farther and evaluate it. One was with Caltrans and UC Berkeley Path and Volvo Trucks. They did a demo in September of this year with 3 truck platoons. Auburn University was funded under the same program. We're doing some demos this year. I'm part of that work. And also the U.S. Army is involved. They move a lot of freight around. Their research center called TARDEC worked with Auburn University, used that same sort of technology to do a demo in September in Michigan moving into Canada, so like the first cross-border demo. And this involved even more higher level automation. Starting out, we'll see 2 truck platoons on the market. There's no reason to, take the risk and freak out the regulators and the public with a 3 or 4 or 5 truck platoon. It's technically possible. No, what you're going to see is just 2 trucks connected together, as that earlier diagram showed. There's more going on out there. Texas Transportation Institute has a very significant program. And then Florida has a significant program, as has been mentioned. There's a study going on right now that I'm involved in, supporting the University of Florida, who has the lead on the study. All the key agencies are there and involved. Pilot testing is being planned, as Tom mentioned. So let me just give you a little bit of insight into what that study is dealing with. In essence, it's a very significant literature review. What's going on out there? What have other countries done? What have other states done? What have we learned? There's not a lot of operational data out there at this point. This is early days, but we pull together what we know. And then the key thing about the study is on the right there, deployment implications to state agencies. To my knowledge, there's been only a very small amount of work in that area. So we'll get into the infrastructure issues, the bridge stuff, as you mentioned, public safety, how did the enforcement officials know if a truck is tailgating another truck, or is it legally platooning, for instance? Administrative processes. So this is I think, a significant report, and we're hearing that other states around the country are going to be very interested to see it as well. So to kind of wrap up the platooning part of this, commercial development, I have a few more slides actually. Peloton, as I said, they're pioneering it. Daimler Trucks, or Freightliner here in the U.S., has been working on this for a while. They've recently become public about it. Navistar has said that they will offer the platooning system on trucks beginning in 2018. So next year is when we're going to see this in commercial operation on our roads in the states where it's legal. How are we going to evolve? This level 1 product introduction, as I mentioned, is very soon. I think it will initially be within fleet. You got big fleets, you work with your own trucks, you have no issues of trust or maintenance standards and all that. Eventually we'll go interfleet, the market will ask for that. We will get to longer platoons if it makes sense, if the 2 truck platoons cause no concerns at a state level, enforcement level, et cetera. There's more benefits with longer platoons. And interestingly, over the years, we talk about driverless trucks. Some people are doing that. I think we'll see this evolution of the driver role in the follower trucks to higher level of automation. So it may be the first time we see driverless trucks on the road will be as a follower truck behind a human-driven lead truck. Could be. There's a lot of information resources out there. I guess these slides will be shared, so I just want to include this. Now, my last piece of this use case universe is the highway pilot world. It's the open highway, what's going on out there. This has gotten very interesting, and this, as I said, the venture capitalists have had this epiphany about trucks. This is where their money's been going. We've had the traditional players for a while, the American Trucking Association and how they represent fleets, as well as the truck OEMs. They're focused on concepts like driver support, maybe getting up to level 3, which would allow the driver to be, eyes down, doing some other kind of work. That would require the federal government to change the hours of service regulations for the business case to work, but it's out there. The business case there is safety enhancement, enhancing the driver's job. I'll talk about the labor challenges in trucking, and maybe creating attractive new jobs based on new kinds of freight operations. So those are traditional players. Startups, their current concepts are disruptive. Highway driverless, level 4, hands off, feet off, eyes off, brain off, or completely no driver, exit to exit on the interstate. And at the street level, either driverless with remote control, as Starsky Robotics is exploring, or possibly humans jump in for some of that. The business case to them is very clear: reduce cost by replacing drivers with automation. Startups are a little less motivated to worry about the bigger societal issues. They're just going for return on investment. But we have a very interesting case here, a very interesting situation when you start to talk about replacing drivers Or that's really not the right way to say it. It's more about going driverless without necessarily replacing drivers, because we have a perfect storm in the way of driver shortage. We have thousands of driverless trucks in this country sitting parked at truck fleet yards because there's no drivers to drive those trucks. That kind of driverless. That ain't good. So the conditions that we're dealing with now for current truckers that make automation attractive also create the driver shortage. The limited time for breaks, the conditions are stressful, time away from home. We heard about some of that yesterday. The average age of drivers is quite high. They're retiring. We also heard about that yesterday. And it's very tough to recruit young people into this community. Very, very tough. Some of the truckers are now saying, the truck fleets are saying, they're having trouble recruiting because some drivers will show up or candidates will show up and say, oh, well, my job's going to go away if I take this career field. And that's not the case. You'll hear the truck fleet say that. There will be jobs for truckers for many, many years to come. And hopefully this technology can make these systems, this environment more attractive to drivers. Driver experiencing a form of teamwork, working with another driver in a platoon. The highly automated transforms the work environment in so many ways. And there are some scenarios where individual driver pay can increase as their job is transformed, different pay structures. But what we're looking at, in terms of the driver shortage, here's some data that's out there. As we go out to, say, 2022, that's not too far away, we're looking at 239,000 drivers missing, driver shortfall given the freight needs out there. If you look at the bottom of the slide, some project 500,000 drivers will be needed and not available in 5 years. So we have a huge issue here. And obviously, we can see changes happening here. There'll be increased trucking capacity versus other freight modes. Automation is what we see as the way of gradually working down that gap. So there'll be plenty of drivers working in addition to new trucks on the road that are automated. Now, this is what's interesting, though, is we see the traditional players there. There's just a few. But what we see on the right is the startup world. Prior to 2017, only 2 companies in that list, the ones in the regular font, were actively, publicly pursuing truck automation. Go to 2017, and all these others are now in it. It's really amazing. And they've done some very impressive things. We're going to see a lot more. Tesla has a big announcement tomorrow, I think it is, about their truck technology. I don't know the details. We'll find out tomorrow. But I'm interested to see if they'll be talking more about their automation activities. So this will give you a feel for what these level 4 trucks can do. This is a driverless, it's not a driverless truck. It's a truck emulating driverless mode by being, I'll just play it while I talk. A driver is at the wheel, hands close to the wheel, very alert driver, ready to take over, so level 2 driving, but emulating level 4, testing level 4 as if there was no driver in there. And you watch this for just a few seconds, and it's boring because there's nothing going on. It's a truck going down the highway. These are the freeways, I-80 and 880 around Silicon Valley and San Francisco. They just went in a loop, so they're doing freeway-to-freeway merges. They're doing lane changes when they feel they need to for the traffic. That's what it looks like. That's what it's supposed to look like. There's a lot of interest from the truck fleets. I think a couple of years ago, the truck fleets, I lead a task force for the American Trucking Association on automated driving and platooning. A couple of years ago, this was laughable. And now truck fleets are in serious discussions with these kinds of folks. So let me wrap up. Where from here? As I said, 2018 is like tomorrow. We'll see level 1 platooning on highways. 2020, we'll see rapid uptake of this platooning. It's a low level. It's just a moderate step up in terms of capability. It's not disruptive to the truck fleets. And I can see us seeing level 4 driverless systems on highways even in 2020 maybe sooner, but this will not be everywhere. The way this driverless will come out will be in little pockets, maybe 100 miles here, a couple of 100 miles there. It depends on the specific freight that's involved, the specific fleet that's involved, the specific state. And we know some states will kind of roll out the red carpet because they want it in their state. Embark just this week had a press release saying they had been moving refrigerators across 4 states, Texas to California, level 4 with a driver monitoring in the driver's seat, but they've been doing that for a couple of months now. And we're going to see more of these things. We'll sort of tiptoe our way into it. So 2025, I think we may see traffic jam assist at level 3. Imagine if a driver was not burning hours time, driving time when in a traffic jam or at a gate, at a port. That would transform their business, and if you're an owner-operator, it would transform their ability to make money. And we'll see this level 4 driverless increasingly more prevalent. We'll see driverless followers in platoons and the independent driverless trucks. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right, how are we doing? Oh yeah, we're doing good. All right, so we got plenty of time for questions. Like Alex, since I got the mic, I'm going to hog the first one, and as it was part of my little spiel beforehand, what I need to ask right up front is what would be your take on what someone like Florida DOT could or should be doing to facilitate and enable your success where we all get to better safety, better mobility? What would be your inputs on that kind of thing? Would love to hear those thoughts from anyone, whoever. Trucks, cars, shared mobility.
I think, of course, the things that I talked about facilitating connectivity, facilitating the connected environment infrastructure, whether those starts in highways or cities, we just got to get started, right? It's more than just a vehicle-to-vehicle local DSRC. It's connected to that infrastructure, and I think with all of the timelines we've seen, that's kind of the underlying assumption, but we just need to get at it.
Yeah, from our perspective, I already sort of mentioned it, but managed lanes are the #1 thing that a Department of Transportation can do. Put in the infrastructure now so that you can decide what types of vehicles and what modes you want on your highways. And so with a managed lane now, of course, you can encourage carpooling or electric vehicles or public transit. And in the future, it's going to slide perfectly into automation and connectivity. Mm-hmm. So put the managed lane in now, perhaps have it be physically separated, because I think it was John mentioned, when autonomous vehicles drive with humans, they have to be careful of dangerous humans. When they only drive with autonomous vehicles, they can drive in a much more efficient fashion. So I think putting in that infrastructure now is key.
I'm chuckling a little because as a human driver, I'd really like to drive in the autonomous vehicle lane. I feel like I'd already be safer and have a better quality of ride, even as a human driver. From my perspective, I don't want to be the naysayer you already started the day off with, which is we have to make self-driving vehicles work on all types of roads. Mm-hmm. And so we can't pick and choose which ones we will always get in the quality of those roads. So the same infrastructure benefits that help human-driven vehicles will help self-driving vehicles. Good quality lane markings, good quality traffic control devices, good quality road design, fixing potholes. These are all generally beneficial things. In terms of connectivity, connectivity will always be a plus. Connectivity probably won't be a critical path when it comes to self-driving, because self-driving vehicles are going to have to operate on their own, right. Whether they have a remote connectivity or not.
Kind of the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, but they can be supplemented by it. Mm-hmm. And they can especially be supplemented by it for non-critical real-time communication. So, enhanced routing and traffic control would make an amazing difference in self-driving vehicles. So whether that's in terms of a unique lane or just knowing where the traffic is, we will find self-driving vehicles are going to route based on best available route at that time. So connectivity will help. It just won't be a critical path.
Yeah,
So-
another piece where I don't know if I mentioned it, starting off another piece, what we're really trying to do something with in terms of the connectivity, especially around the test bed around University of Florida and the city of Gainesville, where you got 50,000 students that aren't paying attention to what they're doing, whether they're walking, riding a bike, or even on a scooter, is how to also connect them so we can get their location tied back to the car that you've got that's got the capability when it's being broadcast. How do we close that loop so we can start killing less of the vulnerable users?
So I agree with all of these comments very much. I think the freeways are pretty much okay as long as they're well marked, et cetera. And the whole industry needs a consistent regulatory environment, ideally, a minimum of switch-ups, as you go across state borders. But on the street side, of course, it gets very complicated. What I say to infrastructure operators is it's all about data. The demo, I don't know how many of you got to get in the Audi car or the TTS car, which was an Audi that is traffic signal aware of traffic signal timing, and will give you a sense of when that signal is going to change. That's data coming from the city that goes to this aggregator TTS, and then they sell that data to car OEMs. So Audi's the only one offering this right now as a commercial product. That's great, but as many of you know, there's a lot of jurisdictions that don't even have the data. It's not about them choosing to share it. They don't even have it. The public sector needs to invest so that every city, everywhere, every traffic signal is, that data is available in the cloud, and all the rest of us can make use of it.
Maybe just to add, I'd also focus on some of the smart lane applications, as people said. Florida's always been a leader. I-95, hot lanes or HOV lanes to hot lanes, urban partnership agreement, transit involving in that. So I think you're a natural test bed for a lot of those activities.
Speaking, Richard, tying to what most of your presentation, but also John with Lyft, really it ties to all of you as it relates to platooning. I think this stuff's moving so fast. Yeah, we're talking about 2 trucks right now, but when it's 3, 4, 5, when it's a train, or when it's just passenger vehicles, connected autonomous that are platooning themselves, have you guys heard of any, we've talked about it internally, and it's another one of the head scratchers, any talk on basically kind of turning some of the policy upside down, where like right now, slow traffic, move to the right. So that's where all the trucks are, that's where the slow cars are. Does it come a time, or is anybody thinking about, well, maybe we need to move all those trucks to the left lane so that people can get on and off and aren't cutting in between them, and basically turning the, slow traffic move to the left or something like that? Have you heard anything of that?
Not beyond what you're talking about. Folks are talking and scratching their heads. But I think we're able to take it in a very step-by-step basis. 2 trucks, let's see how that goes. They'll be very rare on the roads early on.
Yeah.
There'll be a point where...
But assuming growing quickly.
Yeah, and there'll be a point where truckers may want to do 3 or 4 trucks, but it doesn't work for the public, doesn't work everybody else on the road, so that will have to be played through.
Yeah, I think maybe 5 years from now, I think that this idea of lanes dedicated to automated, connected, and even zones of cities is really, really exciting. We're just not there yet. The way we're going to introduce autonomous vehicles is with partners like Ford. We have a partnership with Ford, and with Delphi and Nutonomy, and with Waymo. So the way we're going to do it is just integrate the vehicles into our fleet, just like we onboard a normal driver. So you're going to start to see automated vehicles on the Lyft fleet just like you see a driver. But eventually, in a few years, depending how quickly it goes, we'll hit a critical mass where a city or a highway department or a state department of transportation could say, gosh, there are enough of these vehicles, enough of these trucks. That lane is automated connected. That urban core is automated connected. And that's where you flip into this new paradigm of 5x efficiency.
We get into the design for people piece that you mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'll add just a little bit more. All of this development work is happening to make a vehicle able to drive itself, because that's what these technology providers can control. They can't control the aggregate interaction that has to happen to reduce congestion. The business case is not too strong when you can't control all the factors you need to make it work. So that's a tough one. You know, the car version of this platooning is called Cooperative Adaptive Cruise Control. It's been prototyped, it's been proven, Federal Highways is testing it. But if you're a Toyota or a Honda or a Ford, you can't guarantee that to your customer because you don't know about that other car out there that you can connect to. However, the fleet world is different because you might have, you know, a Lyft might choose to require all its cars have a certain capability, then they're available to connect. And then if, you know, there's a huge number of those type cars in the city, you get some benefit. So again, the fleet side is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and it even seems a relatively small saturation of those kind of vehicles has the potential to make some very big gains in traffic management, traffic movement, traffic efficiencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw one that just said that one automated connected vehicle kind of serving as a pace car could help mitigate congestion problems on highways. So that's really exciting research that's coming out.
Okay, and I got a ton of questions. I got one more, and then I'll let the crowd get at it. But one, anybody who lives in Florida is well aware of what I'm talking about. And actually, probably most of you, if you came from out of the state, are well of it too. It was maybe 2 months ago, we had a minor weather event called Irma. In the future, the scenario where the vast majority of the vehicles out there are electric and shared, we were in a position in Florida where the way that thing was tracking coming across the west through the Caribbean was going to hang a right straight up Florida, except for like 5 counties in the Panhandle. Basically, everybody had an evacuation order. In the end, it was 6 point something. We got a couple folks here who know the numbers probably off the top of their head from DOT, but 6 point something million vehicles moved out of the state of Florida over the course of about a week. What was very interesting is once that storm passed, they all wanted to come back the next day. But where I want to go with that is if we're electric and shared, which means there's a kind of a right number of vehicles for moving people in everyday, day-to-day business, and they're electric, what happens when we need to evacuate the state of Florida, which is now no longer a worst case, science fiction? It's like, yeah, we did this. And then to take that a step further, what would be your thoughts on that whole crowd wants to come back the very next day after the wind stopped blowing and all the power's out? It'd be interesting to hear some thoughts. Like, we kind of like, oh my God, how the heck are we going to do something like that?
It's a whole lot of charging stations.
Whole lot of charging. We brought in a lot of extra gas. I mean, we were mobile fuel stations, but maybe it's the same thing with electric. But even if it was, John, I think you were saying it would actually be less VMT if the efficiencies gained. So I'm assuming that would mean really less vehicles out there now. Then would there even be enough vehicles to move all those people?
I actually think it's a better scenario with shared electric because the photos I remember seeing, and maybe some of you lived through this, were lines at gas stations. And so in a scenario where we're all driving Teslas, right, or we all have access to Tesla mobility or automated Lyft, the vehicles are going to be fueled up because they fueled up overnight. So everybody's going to have a full 300-plus mile range electric vehicle to get the heck out of Dodge. And so I actually think that's better. I think also what I saw is you had to bring in gasoline on fuel tankers. Mm-hmm. As soon as the sun's shining again, if we had a renewable energy grid, as soon as the sun shines, you've got fuel for the vehicles. And then on the vehicle occupancy side, everybody driving their single occupant vehicle in and out of Florida is terrible. But if you imagine a scenario shared, you can more efficiently fill seats, and I think that makes it easier to get
Yeah, I wonder if that'd be the case on an evacuation. You're packing up the family and the dog and half your trash and heading north.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It'd be interesting. It's going to be an interesting, if it comes to that, interesting to see how that plays out.
But that's a really interesting point, though. You can't make gas at home. You can make electricity at home, and that area is...
If the electricity's on.
Huh?
If the electricity's on.
Yeah, if it's on.
I think.
Oh, help me out there. I'm not an expert here.
Or you have a solar roof.
Oh, we have a solar
roof's what I was thinking.
Or you have Tesla.
This whole, I think what the hurricanes of the last couple of months have shown, and we're doing some work on this, is this whole notion of resiliency. And how do you plan for better resiliency, not only in evacuations, but in coming back. And this, let's assume the next hurricane, wherever it's going to be, is either, since we're still in season, or it's going to be here in the next year, you're going to see incrementality here, I think, in terms of how those responses get better. I do believe the information is shared well. I think with regards to this particular issue, battery technology continues to go down that cost curve, and we're continue to see more storage capacity in those batteries. So the 300-mile range vehicle will in 5 years be a 400-mile range vehicle. And you'll actually be able to turn on your air conditioning while you're idling in traffic on 95 trying to evacuate. Yeah. So all of those things tend toward something that I think will become more resilient as the technology itself improves and you get out before the power gets cut out and don't need to recharge at home.
Yeah, that would be the hope from our perspective. That it, yeah. All right, let me go to the crowd. I'm looking in a glare. I can hardly see out there. So okay, I see one coming.
All right. Naturally, this is Ed coming up to ask you questions. John Kwant, is that how you say it?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's like the Spanish Inquisition up here.
Yeah, I know. That's what I've been hearing from a lot of people. From Ford's perspective, I guess a little background first. I've done a lot of research and papers on electrification and the effect basically on the future demise of the gas tax as a revenue source for transportation. And in that, EIA was forecasting increased fuel efficiency based on CAFE standards and then kind of flattening out. Bloomberg Energy was projecting that we'd have about 35% of cars purchased in 2040 would be electric, fully electric. Al is working for a company that's basically all full electric already and generating kind of the price situation where a lot of people are going to jump into it. And Jon Walker is talking about really heavily focused on the shared mobility, but a shared mobility in an EV autonomous vehicle environment. What does Ford think? How quickly, I'm just sensing that based on recent information that even the Bloomberg forecast is way low, that we're going to see much more rapid electrification. What does Ford think about that?
So we believe in those same trends as well, and I think it was last week or the week before, we announced a dramatic shift in our intention to shift capital investment away from conventional powertrains toward electrified powertrains. I think for us, for everyone here, in the mass market, it's whether or not consumers are going to adopt those when gas is in the 250 to 320 range here. We see that uptick in electric adoption at the lower end once gas goes over $4 a gallon. There's at current personal economics. But as I just mentioned, those economics get increasingly better as we go down that cost curve. We alleviate range anxiety when batteries, or we address it when batteries are 300 to 400 miles in range, true range. So it's a combination of all of those things and looking to apply those. Meanwhile, we haven't stopped improving the internal combustion engine. I drive an F-150. It's the first truck I've had at Ford in 18 years, and I remember the debates we were having internally 8 years ago that nobody who owns a pickup truck or wants a pickup truck is going to want a 6-cylinder engine in that vehicle. This is an 8-cylinder market. You probably remember these things. Now, and I have a 6-cylinder EcoBoost truck, that's 50% of the market. 50% of our F-150 pickup trucks have 6-cylinder engines through the addition of simple technologies like supercharging, and turbocharging. So there's still improvements to be made to conventional engines while we're transitioning to other powertrains and trying to time all that, depending on what oil prices are, where scarcity is, where charging stations are. There's so many factors to consider here. I would look at it as saying, we've got chips on the roulette table in a number of different places, and we're willing to put more chips in one place when we see evidence that allows us to do that. And I think we're beginning to do that toward electrification.
This is a real important point for you, for FDOT, because obviously the entire transportation industry, whether it's a national level, state level, or wherever, is dependent on the taxation of motor fuel for the primary source of funding for transportation. Still is. Mm-hmm. And yet the technology change, we're focused on automated vehicles and driverless vehicles, but the technology change in propulsion both to meet CAFE standards and because of the introduction and aggressive potential take-up and policy changes and moves to electric vehicles, is going to have a dramatic impact on the viability of the gas tax. So I think one of the side issues here, in addition to automating vehicles, is to start to think about new ways to fund transportation, and that's just a suggestion. Thanks.
Would agree.
Hi, Jeff Kupko, Michael Baker International, and I'm actually building on that, and I thought he was going to take away my question. This was a little more directed right at you, Al. You certainly had the incentivize piece on your slide there, and I was curious as to your stance on additional revenue streams for electrified vehicles, and certainly could go to any of the other panelists from there, and you know, where you would be a partner in that.
Well, I'm certainly sympathetic in this audience and the need for transportation funding. I've worked in the transportation industry my whole career, and yeah, I think we all count on good quality roads, and the funding has to come from somewhere. With respect to that, though, I think it's important to consider how we do incentivize the move to more national security, more in terms of fuel independence, more health and wellness improvements. You know, China estimates something like 20,000, in the city of Beijing, the government there estimates approximately $20,000 in lifetime healthcare costs due to the smog and health condition caused by internal combustion engines. They're excited about electric vehicles, not because of fuel savings, but because they have big long-term issues. And so I'm very sympathetic to the importance and need for transportation funding, but I also want to make sure it's considered in the bigger context of total government spending and how we can improve the health and well-being of our public.
I have a question over on the side here. Hi.
Oh, okay.
Hiding over here. I'm Abby Morgan from Kittleson and Associates, and just have a question for you. We're in Florida here. We don't have annual vehicle inspections required. So I wanted to know either what actions you're taking or what advice you have for our policymakers regarding ensuring the safe operation of connected or automated technologies, let's say 5 years after point of sale.
Well, I'll say a couple of things and then turn it over. One great thing about a connected autonomous vehicle, and I should qualify my comment, Tom, earlier about the need for connectivity in vehicles. The vehicle itself needs connectivity to its manufacturer and/or operator, but in terms of infrastructure connectivity, I think that's the bonus. Yeah. The thing that we will get great realization from is that there's more data collected on board the vehicle. There's more data that can be transmitted off the vehicle. And so if it's a net benefit to the public for information to be exchanged to help speed up and automate things like inspections, come talk to us. Tell us what it is that would help you. In terms of the vehicle, I think autonomous vehicles will be a game changer in terms of the interaction with the manufacturer and or operator in a way that we just don't have on most existing vehicles. Those vehicles continue to be updated over their lifetime. They'll continue to improve. They have security and safety improvements. So in terms of where are they going to be in 5 years, the answer is hopefully the vehicle 5 years out the 5-year-old vehicle in the future is going to be just as good as the currently produced vehicle in terms of its quality of autonomous operation.
I'll add to that. I can maybe speak from the truck side, even though that may not be your particular world. You know, the Florida Highway Patrol and the state police in general inspect trucks. That's their role for safety. When it comes to platooning specifically, since that's the near-term item, my recommendation has been there's no need for any additional inspection process or items simply because the truck is capable of platooning. They're already inspecting the brakes. You need your brakes to be working. That's it. So that's one example.
Thank you.
Along those lines, well, what about if the vehicle needs to get fixed or repaired and it's something aftermarket?
and it somehow ties into the magic you guys have built into the vehicles.
Well, that would be the intent. It's not, we've got the devices in the car right now that tell you what needs to be fixed, right? It's, we've got apps that interface with the car that can tell you exactly what needs to get done. And anybody who has the right hookup with the ODB2 port can diagnose very quickly, what ails the vehicle. So I think it's right. With increasing connectivity, you probably don't need to physically inspect, depending, of course, what you're looking for, the physical condition of tires other than tire pressure and some other things. But the vehicle is new, should be relatively good for a number of years afterwards and not need inspection. It depends on what are the driving conditions in that particular state and what you might need to do after a certain point in time and what can't be gathered by actually digitally connecting to the car.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Tom. I'm Mary Grace Parker with the I-95 Corridor Coalition. The words that I haven't heard a lot today, and not just in this panel, refer specifically to rural. And there's been a lot of discussion about urban needs. And so for each of the panelists, I'd like to kind of ask how you're thinking about rural. From Florida to Maine, we have significant parts of every one of these states, for the most part, that do have rural populations, unimproved roads among them. So how are you thinking about this, for example, Katie, in terms of research? There's still an AASHTO standard for unimproved roads. Many of them exist. For Ford, for those F-150s, I have one, thank you, moving along on unpaved roads. For Lyft, I can tell you, living in a rural area about 30 miles from Saratoga, they don't like to come get me. And they're talking about also aging populations trying to live in somewhat economically challenged areas, agriculturally. Same thing with Tesla. Have a friend who has a Tesla. It doesn't do such a great job on my dirt road. I know you're probably getting there. And Richard, I don't know what's going to mean with platooning trucks, but I think it's an important issue to start to talk about now because it is a constituency, not only in this corridor, but as we get more into the Midwest and into underserved population areas. So could each of you kind of just talk about how you're factoring that in so hopefully it just doesn't have a business cases that roll out and then we're trying to figure out how to catch up.
Sure. Why don't I start and then others can add. So I think that's an excellent point. Obviously, a state like Texas, lots of rural areas, and that is a concern. How do we make sure that whatever's being looked at is equitable for urban, suburban, exurban, and rural areas? And as you talk to people, what are their needs? Certainly electrification can work in rural areas. How do we make sure we're expanding transit in those areas and maintaining transit services, providing additional services? Some of the things that are being looked at are, can you match package delivery services with some of the existing rural transit providers to provide efficiencies and enhance both of those types of services? So I think it's a key issue, a critical issue, and we just need to make sure as we move forward that we consider the needs of really all different types of geographical areas and make sure that we don't leave areas of the country, areas of different states and population groups behind.
So I think about this a lot because I actually live in a rural part of Michigan, Saline, just south of Ann Arbor. And I think about the things that I know that we're working on and how they'll apply there. A lot of this and Jon may back this up, a lot of it from a shared services standpoint, in terms of efficiency rolling out, does depend on population density. I mean, we can't deny that, the terms of fleets. And just customer expectations in terms of being able to summon a vehicle to go somewhere. In a rural setting, unless for some reason there's just a lot of extra people out there driving for Lyft or Uber, you're not going to get that same coverage that you have in an urban setting. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It doesn't exist. On Friday and Saturday nights when people want to go into Ann Arbor, there's plenty of Ubers and Lyfts running around ready to facilitate that. So it does kind of peak and follow those demand times. I think, from an auto OEM perspective, rural is also interesting because while pickup trucks will also receive all of the same connected benefits that we see in cars, this is where I think personal ownership will be maintained for a long time, because I don't see people in the trades, I don't see people in farms, I don't see people in rural areas necessarily giving up a vehicle, both for the density issue and coverage of some shared options, but also because these trucks represent their livelihoods, and they need them to actually perform jobs, perform chores, perform tasks. So could they be, you know, a level 3, level 4 combination where when they do take that truck, you know, onto long trips, it then plugs into a grid that takes them places? Yeah, that will probably likely happen. But this will be this coexistence of more shared use within urban settings, and I think more personal or continued personal ownership in rural. And the uptake there won't be as high as in urban just because of a density.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jon said it. I think we will be able to serve 99% of the country. Obviously, in downtown New York or downtown San Francisco, it's easier. But I think when we model it and we computer model it, we work for 99% of the country with a shared automated model. So I think it'll get better, and it won't be maybe as efficient as a city, but rural is a expansion market we're interested in. So.
There's not all that much to add. I think these guys said it very well. This is just effectiveness and efficiency. The great thing is we're a big nation with a lot of different cultural elements within our driving styles, and we'll continue to see shared ownership, personal ownership, fleet ownership, and that's a great thing, because that means we can slowly transition. In terms of vehicle electrification and autonomy, well, electrification, I mean, I think the average American, Katie probably knows this better than anybody, drives about 25 miles a day, so it's not difficult to operate an electric vehicle in a rural area any more than an internal combustion engine. And in terms of vehicle autonomy, there's some pragmatic realities here that autonomy will work better initially on roads with better quality, more pavement, more lines, more traffic control devices. But as I said before, self-driving vehicles will continue to have to work on every environment in which they are enabled to operate, and that will continue to expand into not just urban areas, but suburban and rural areas as well.
Well, Tom, as you said, I'm the guy with 25 years in this, so I'm going to offer a little perspective. So the question was about equity. You know, when we were running the USDOT program in the 90s, technology was a challenge in the 90s, but the biggest challenge that weighed upon us was we were government. So we had to deal with social equity and land use and a bunch of broad issues, and that's the nature of this community. What about social equity? What about everybody? But the obvious point is, I mean, we have 3 corporations represented here who are good corporate citizens. But nevertheless, the private sector doesn't have to deal with all that stuff. The private sector has to satisfy one customer at a time. And as long as there's a market, it happens. And things like equity can't be assumed or can't be expected from the private sector. So if the government wants it, the government needs to incentivize it and make a business case that works, or just wait.
I just want to add something. I had a good friend back at Ford, and I'll quote him in saying there's a butt for every seat for an auto manufacturer. And so eventually there are going to be all of these options in every community to suit the needs. Where there's a commercially viable product, there's an intent to fulfill it.
Hi. Yeah, see, we've only got like 5 minutes left. I see that one first, that in the middle. I'm not sure I can get to all 3. So.
Hi, I'm Sanjay Ranka from University of Florida. I have a quick question. Traditional car designs were for 4 to 5 seats for the mass market. How do you see that changing as we move away from personal ownership to shared ownership?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. The traditional size of the car was 4 to 5 seats in a car. As things move away from personal ownership to shared ownership, how do you see that design changing?
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I think when you look at some of the display devices out here, I know like Transdev's shuttle's got 6 seats. This is going to be something that I didn't speak too much about. You know, one of the other pivots our company is taking is to be more human-centered in design, to really understand human use. And I think that's going to change for every city. Some cities will want multiple carriages of 4 seats, 6, 8, 10, 12 are possible as well. It really depends on what you need to carry within any city. Our transit bus, which Chariot puts in use, is a 14-passenger van. That may be too much or too little, depending on what you need to carry. So I think it's really going to vary. It depends on the application and the use, depends on the time of day. There's all kinds of things. I will say, though, that as we move toward an autonomous future, these vehicles will look much different than traditional vehicles today. A lot of the AV testing that we've been done has been on our Ford Fusion platform, but I wouldn't necessarily think that that's going to be the carriage that's going to put in use that ultimately moves people around in the cities. They'll take very different form factors.
Yeah, and from our point of view at Lyft, we want to see a spectrum of vehicles, and I think you'll see some really exciting new vehicle types that emerge that just aren't viable today. I mean, imagine a 2-seater or a 1-seater that's like a first class on an airplane, because most of the time we're driving just by ourselves in a vehicle, so imagine a 1-seater. I think that could be really interesting. They can't build it now because nobody would buy that because they have to think about the couple times they might take the whole family or whatever. So I think it's a whole new era of vehicle design and manufacture, and it's right vehicle for right job. On the Lyft app already, you've got 6 choices of different vehicles. So if you want a limo to take the wife out or whatever, you can do that. If you want a small sedan, you can do that. So I think we're just going to see the auto manufacturers start catering to that mobility services spectrum.
Okay, I think maybe we have time for one more, and I saw, sorry in the middle. We'll see if this goes quick. Maybe I'll get back to you. But.
I'll go quick. Question for Al. What kind of analysis have you all done on electrification and America's energy grid? Is there a point where we'll need more energy?
Well, I'm mostly a self-driving car guy and a safety guy, so I might not be the best person to speak to that. But certainly we're going to need an increase in, we're going to consume more power as we add for electrification. I think Tesla's view is that a distributed system is more efficient and more secure, and that's why we have invested in our solar roof and our Powerwall systems, which not only distribute the load both to individuals and at the community or city level, but they supplement the power that's within the electric grid already.
All right, we still got 2 minutes left. Was there still one in the middle?
Yes.
If we do a quick one.
Okay. As we change the levels of automation and the role of the driver changes, I've been seeing among the aviation industry that as we implemented glass cockpits and autopilots, some human errors were decreasing and disappeared, but it arose a new set of human factor errors. So I was wondering how the Department of Transportation and Lyft is changing the education for drivers and training programs, and how it's predicting this shift of human errors and the new set of human factors that is going to be arising from changes in driver roles.
I think that was geared to DOT, but we are doing some research on human factors. We are, even though there's 4 E's in safety, what is it? Education, engineering, enforcement, emergency response. We're mostly the engineering, but we play a big part in the education as well. We have efforts going on in that regard too. Maybe not enough, but we do have our eyes on it.
Thanks.
Okay, one quick admin note before we thank this panel. Breakout start at 10:30. I know the networking is important, and we're getting out right on time. So if you would, please make an effort to get to whatever session you go to at 10:30. And then to reiterate what Joe said, the way the logistics are for lunch, please get there right at 12 so they can work their magic in the pavilion, the tent out there. And then with that, this panel all came from out of state to contribute and share their thoughts with you. So let's thank this panel, please.